At this point, we want to bring all of our presenters back onto the stage, where we'll start a panel discussion. So Ricardo Salvador, Clayton Bracupe, and Robin Kimmerer, if you can all come to the center of the stage. So let me start with this question for the entire panel. Plant geneticist Pamela Ronald studies genes that make plants resistant to disease and tolerant of stress. She cites the significant benefits of genetic modification of plants, such as creating rice varieties that are able to survive exposure to floodwaters over long durations, and that provide nutritional attributes such as the vitamin A precursor, beta-carotene, that has the potential of saving the lives of thousands of children around the world. Others, like genetic scientist David Suzuki, believe that food companies are predominantly eyeing profits and are conducting non-consensual and uninformed experiments on consumers for which the long-term consequences are unknown. How is the public to make sense of these competing positions and arriving at our own determinations for what and what not to eat? Anybody want to go first? Okay.
Well, I'll take one stab at it, and it'll be a simplification, but at least I want to recognize that it's a conversation, and that there are people involved, actually some of the people that you named, who are attempting to do the right thing, so that I'm not questioning motives. But there's something really important to draw from consensus that I saw drawn by the three of us here, and that is that we really have to question what system analysts call recomplication of systems. So that when systems like the ones that have been described here break down, it is going to be the consequence that there is going to be a deficiency, there's going to be either hunger, there's going to be nutritional deficiencies, there's going to be diseases associated with that, and then we will need to deal with that. And so one way to do that is to reconstruct the kinds of systems that we've described, which are wholesome and bring all kinds of other benefits with them in terms of nourishing the system of which they're a part. But then there's the approach that you can take, which is to try to compensate or recomplicate the system with knowledge that's external to the natural parts that are already there and that are sufficient. So one way of restating this is, why are those approaches necessary? So for instance, we can ask the question of the vitamin A deficiency, which is a hobby horse, a very favorite example to bring out when talking about some of the benefits of biotechnology. So let me just be clear that the science that's behind this is science that is very important and that is in a very deep tradition about what Western science is doing, which is attempting to understand the parts of systems. It's what we do with that understanding that is something that we all need to be really in careful conversation about. But coming back to the point, that vitamin A deficiency results because the types of systems that we've described here break down, so that there is not an abundance of green leafy vegetables from which the majority of us would get that kind of a nutrient, or at least a precursor for what we convert into vitamin A. And so the answer to that is actually a very simple, relatively direct and cheap in any sense. A way of reconstituting a system, which is make sure that you are growing green leafy vegetables and that they're accessible to people, that they're part of the diet, that they're physically accessible, that they're economically accessible, that they're affordable. That's the way that you deal with it. There's a very nice study for those of you that are interested in the scientific aspect of this by a lead Argentinian scientist whose last name is Rótolo. If you look up Rótolo et al., you'll find the study from last year, which actually looks at this very systematically by utilizing a concept from Eugene Odum, which is called embodied energy. And with embodied energy, what you actually do is an accounting of all of the effort that it takes in order to develop a particular object, in this case, plants. And it answers the question that I asked rhetorically earlier: why do we need those sorts of things when there are very simple ways of addressing these that don't involve recomplicating? And the way that it answers that question is that Rótolo and her colleagues took a look at the maize production systems that involve utilizing transgenics. Very, very sophisticated science. There's no denying all of the knowledge that's required in order to come up with these transgenic maize cultivars. But when you look at the embodied energy that's required to produce them, the return to all of that investment is significantly lower than the traditional way that Clayton has described, in which we improve maize as a part of our food system in a way that's healthful, in a way that actually builds up natural systems. So it's impressive in one way, but in the most fundamental way, which is, do we need it at all, and why do we need to go to that effort? It's actually not necessary whatsoever. And so utilizing the actual tools that we have to constitute systems that make sense, I think would be a much more productive way to approach these questions of, first of all, having sufficient food, and then having the right food, food that makes us healthful, and doesn't create all these externalities of polluting our environment, making us sick, and so on. So that would be my first approximation to that. Again, not doubting anybody's intentions, but asking people to think, why do we have that problem to begin with?
I think that's a wonderful answer, and you brought so many elements into that. I don't have too much more to add to that, but I would want to say, related to it, that oftentimes when we look at the system, or we look at the land, we could say, well, our food systems are broken, and so there is this imperative for genetically modified organisms. But more often than not, I really have this sense that it is not the land which is broken, it's our relationships to land which are broken, which put us in these kinds of situations. And so as we make choices about the adoption of or not, of various technologies, I think we have to really consider what does that mean about our relationship to the land and to the plant and animal beings as well.
If you look at the claim, I'll say, is that they're trying to relieve world hunger. And if you look at the people that are mentioned earlier that are in those situations where they're not getting enough nutrition, it's primarily indigenous peoples that have been marginalized off of their original lands into other areas where the lands aren't originally set aside for agriculture. So that's part of the problem, is that our people have been marginalized. They're not on the lands that they were originally given to them. And so maybe part of the solution is to, repatriate them back to their lands with those systems that, that work for millennia to keep them healthy. That's part of it. The other part of it is, though, these other types of crops, even if they were given the opportunity to grow these genetic engineered types of crops, the other part of the equation is that if I was to grow those things, I don't own them. So you have to continually go back to the banker every year to borrow the money, to buy the seed that you never own. So that, to me, that's not a viable solution for sustainability.
Thank you. Robin, this question I'd like to direct to you, at least to start. In your book, Braiding Sweetgrass, you describe how the structure of the Potawatomi language serves to connect human beings to the natural world, and that within Potawatomi language, those things that exist in nature are considered animate, while those things that humans create are considered inanimate. And I was wondering how you apply that sort of cultural philosophy or value to GMOs.
Thank you for that question. That's exactly what I mean about thinking about our relationship to organisms and our relationships to land. As you say, in the Potawatomi language, when we refer to birds or plants or the water, we refer to them with the same grammar that we do for one another. There really aren't very many its except for those things which we have made. There are some exceptions to that, but this grammar of animacy recognizes the personhood and indeed sort of the sovereignty of all other beings. And it then, I think that genetic modification then, because we are we are messing with the genome of sovereign, sacred beings, and so violates that relationship of respectful personhood, one with the next, converting those sacred foods that were given to us, in a sense, to its. I'd ask you to think about the parallels in English, because of course in English we refer to one another with the grammar of animacy, but plants and animals and rivers we refer to as it. In English, you're either a human or you're an it, right? And so this teaching of the grammar of animacy, I think, is an example of the kind of rethinking the kinds of relationships that we have or that we long for with the natural world.
Thank you. A question that came to my mind, Clayton, when you showed the slide of the snowpack in the mountains, and that's where you obtain your irrigation water from for the agriculture. And so I wanted to bounce off of that, but ask all three of you, since you all hail from different regions of the Western Hemisphere, what, if anything, have you experienced or seen as a result of climate change impacting agriculture, food growth in your particular areas?
Like I said, the winter moisture is really important for us. The annual rainfall, actually in New Mexico, we have a good year is around 18 inches total, annual. And so we have limited water, and we've all heard on the news about the drought in California. Maybe this is their second year. In the area we're in, we've gone to several in my children's short lives, and one that has lasted 10 years. And so I don't know if that's a normal cycle or if it's a precursor to what we're going to be seeing. And that's what they're telling us. It's going to increase. And when we do get rains, like I was saying earlier, we've seen them come in a lot harder with stronger winds. So those are the things that we're dealing with in our lives as farmers and in our community. A few years back, it was extremely dry, and it's not just one year's wet and the other year's dry. It's progressively gets drier and drier and drier over a few years. So what you could imagine is that your body, we need to drink, they claim 8 glasses of water a day, but we only have 8. We can only drink 8 today, but tomorrow you can only drink 3. And the day after you can only drink 2, and the day after only 1. So it's progressing, right? And so that one year when we were out in our fields, there was forest fires directly to the west of us and to the east of us. We're in a valley. As we're out there hoeing our weeds, we could see these fires during the day and at night especially, but also during the day we had ash falling on us. And that actually plays sort of on your mind. It's like, what's going on here? You know, it's like, it affects us directly with the amount of water we're getting, but it also affects us emotionally on a daily basis. Like, this isn't normal, and this isn't, and so we're trying to figure out our best solutions to address those things with drought, and we're looking at the diversity of our plants, when we're planting, how deep we're planting, and the timing of planting. So we're experiencing it. My children experience it, and our grandchildren are even going to experience it more.
I would say that in upstate New York, where I call home, what I would want to say, I think, about climate change effects on agriculture itself are, to paraphrase my neighbor, who, when we're standing out by the mailboxes talking, she's a small family farmer, she said, "I didn't know I had a gambling addiction I didn't either. And she said, I'm a farmer, because it's such a gamble. And her sense is that over the, 35 years that she and her husband have been farming, that unpredictability is really the issue, that climate is, from year to year, the variation, and within a year, is huge, and so very difficult to plan for. But the way that they are responding to it, very interestingly, is to diversify crops. They are building more diversity into their agricultural lifestyle, including agritourism, as a way to buffer against those changes. Among traditional plant gatherers, though, that stronger evidence, many plant gatherers that I have spoken with say, well, they go to a certain place where they know that they gather a medicine or a basket plant on the right dates, and they'll get there and find that it's already flowered or it's already fruited. So phenological changes have decreased access and availability to some of the traditional foods and medicines.
So I could actually just reinforce everything that Robin and Clayton have mentioned. And let me just add that you asked him for examples from different parts of the hemisphere. In Oaxaca, one of the ways to deal with this challenge has to do with understanding the advantages of changes in elevation and how that is actually an asset. So if you'll recall some of the images that I showed you, that is a very diverse topographical landscape. So you can have valleys, by definition carved out by rivers, so that there will usually be sufficient moisture, and because of low elevation, they'll be semi-tropical. And so you can actually grow tropical and semi-tropical crops down there and pretty much have something growing year-round. Whereas the higher you go up in elevation, then of course the cooler it gets. If you remember some of those pictures, you saw pine oak vegetation up there. So there's a totally different range of crops that are adapted according to what part of the mountain you're actually cultivating, and you intentionally cultivate in 3 different strata of about 1,500 meters change in elevation, so that something is always growing at each time of the year, and when something fails, you always have a fallback someplace else. And it's not only just the elevation, it's the mixture of crops that are adapted to each elevation. So there's about 80 different species that have a food purpose or a medicinal purpose that Benezat can actually rely on. And so resilience, which is the biodiversity point that has been mentioned here, and also just the design of the system, the integrity of the system, so that there's always something there regardless of what we all know is going to occur, which is, weather changes that we're not in control of, is something that the human that's in interaction with that world can actually always count on.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience at all? Okay. You want to go to the microphone? I'll bring it to you.
I would just like to thank the panelists for their presentation. It's really heartening to know that you're working on this. I think it's really critical, because it's just so upsetting and depressing to think about the power of the large agribusiness and the effects that factory farming is having on our environment, on human health, and not to be last, but the animals that suffer in these conditions. So I think what you're working towards is really important, and I appreciate your presentation. Just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, thanks again for your presentations. I had a question. I know this is focusing mostly on the production side, but on the demand side of this issue, I'm 25 years old. My generation basically grew up on the dollar menu and microwavable processed foods. How do we go about addressing differences in people's tastes to sort of correct the system that we have with food production currently? Thank you.
I guess, to me, one of the places to start is actually, see, if you have children, finding out what if they go to school and the school is feeding them, find out what they're feeding them, because I think that's where a lot of times these addictions that people have start with processed foods, and try to get connections with farmers, other organizations, local, health organizations locally, and try to get the best type of foods, best local foods, back into these institutions like our schools. A lot of times we send our seniors to senior centers for meals and find out what we're feeding them there and make those connections back to local production, farmers markets, and that type of thing. Real quick, most of the stuff I do is when I try to teach people is I tell stories, because that's how I learn, right? And I have 4 adult children, but my youngest daughter, when she was going to school, she farms with us, had farmed with us since she was small, right? And we tried to teach them, and we tried to provide them the best type of food that we could grow. And she was going to our local school, right? Small school. And throughout the year, they take them on field trips. They took them to Albuquerque, which is the biggest city around our area. And they're all in a school bus, and the teacher says, okay, it's time to eat. Where do you want to eat? And most of the kids raised up their hand and they said, we want to eat at, I wouldn't even say the name of the restaurant, but it starts with M, and generally there's a clown cooking for you, right? And she was the youngest in the class, and she wasn't the oldest. She was in the mid. She raised her hand. She says, I don't want to eat there. She says, I want to eat something different. I want to eat, and she named another restaurant. It was a chain restaurant, but they served better food there. And just because of that, this whole class didn't go to this fast food place. They went to another restaurant because she had that. We didn't tell her to do that, but she knew enough that she wanted to eat some good food that particular day. So we have to teach our children. That's the place we're going to start.
I would want to add to that wonderful story a question related to those kinds of foods to which we have become addicted, of fat, salt, carbohydrates, intentionally addicted by the companies that make those foods, is to say, what are we really hungry for? And I think that as people in our affluent society, we are hungry for a relationship. We're hungry for a relationship with land and culture and language and each other. And thinking about food as the nexus of that web of relationships is a way to transcend that, to say, what am I really hungry for? I'm hungry for relationship with a farmer, with the land, with my own body, and with my history. And that, I think, can propel you to the farm market, to the garden, and away from cooking clowns.
Got time for one more question?
Hi, I'm in Sun Valley, Idaho, and I grow rare and unusual heirloom vegetable and fruit plants and seeds that we sell in our community. Our community is amazing and well past the point of understanding that good and real food is important to a healthy lifestyle. But food preparation has been a real problem I've seen with our community in canning, drying, preparing traditional foods to make it through the winter and live seasonally. What advice do you have to encourage people to can their tomatoes past August or dry their chilies to make it through the winter and stuff like that?
coming from a place with a very long winter, we face the same issues. And community canning kitchens, for example, coming in to community. I don't know about you, but when I can tomatoes, it always seems to be like in the season just before my semester starts. It's hot, it's difficult, it's really hard work. But if you do it with others, it's fun. And easy and efficient. And I know there is a move afoot for community food preservation kitchens, from community smokehouses to canneries to drying, and that may be a strategy to help people move in that direction.
I think part of the issue is the breakup of community and extended family. Even indigenous communities have been fractured in that way, and just a generation back, that wasn't an issue. So we work together, and like I said, when we farm, we work together as a family, as a unit, and we're trying to do that as a community. So any activity, be it canning, preparing, processing foods, dehydrating foods, or farming, or any other activity, if it's done as a extended family or as some type of a group, it is a lot more fun. It doesn't become work anymore, it becomes socializing. And I think if we can figure out ways to create those spaces and that time, I think that's the avenue. When our children were small, we purposely didn't have a television so we could spend more time together. And I think if communities started managing their time better, and families started managing their time better by eliminating electronics and regaining working as family and as community, those things, you'll find time for those things. You'll need to replace one thing with another. So hopefully that may be useful.
I'll take a dramatically different approach to that, and I believe everything that Clayton has said, and I think some of the most important things that we saw here today were images of Clayton's family and community doing exactly what he just described. But let me take a slightly different approach to this and just ask you to imagine marketing 101. And maybe some of you actually have this experience, but the way that you do marketing of any widget is to, first of all, create an unsettled feeling in the person you're trying to sell. Look, there's this thing that you need, you didn't know that you needed it, and without this thing, your life is not complete. That's job number one. That's usually done in about 5 or 10 seconds, just, as you're about to get pitched for something. And then, boy, have I got the thing for you. This need that I just told you about, boy, I've got it for you. And it's not worth $600 or $300, I'll sell it to you for $50. So that's basically what a pitch looks like. So our food system is basically that embodied. We have outsourced the food system. And the main thing that food system is doing for us in the modern world is saving us time. It's giving us convenience. So that food for the majority of us is just what we do when we get hungry. And we get hungry and we think, how much time have I got for that? And then somebody else is going to prepare it, warm it, put it right in front of us, and we don't even have to take care of the mess. We just sail away, having put about 20 minutes into it. And about the only thought that we really put into it is, how much time do we have for that meal? And what are we in the mood for? Is it Italian? Is it Korean? Is it Mexican? And, as long as you've got $5 to $8 in your pocket, then the global logistics of the industrial food system will make it possible for you to have whatever popped into your head, and away you go. So you've essentially outsourced every important decision about how that food is prepared, how the people that were involved in growing it, processing it, putting in front of you were being treated, what resources were being used, were they used consumptively or not. There are things done in the name of delivering that to you that none of us would condone if we were aware of them. And so, I'm not going to claim that the opposite extreme is that all of us need to farm and all of us need to prepare our food is the way to handle this. But I think that there is an intermediate that asks us to remember basically what has been stated up here. Your food is not just your food. Your food is the way that you relate to other people on the planet and to the future of both the people and the planet. If we keep that in mind when we make our food choices, we'll decide dramatically different things when the question is, do we go to the M place, or is there a better way that we can reward people that are doing the right thing to get us that food?
Thank you. Thank you very much. For those of you who still may have questions, our panelists will be around afterwards to spend a few minutes. You can ask them at that point. And along those lines, you're also welcome to join us in the Mitzatom Coffee Bar for a wine tasting with the Cedar Band of Paiutes, featuring their award-winning certified sustainable wines, Twisted Cedar. So thank you all for coming, and thank you, Ricardo Salvador, Clayton Bracupe, and Robin Kimmerer for sharing your knowledge and experience with us today.